You're muted.
Hi. Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Thank you. So I'm saying we're probably going to start in around in about 5 minutes, but I put in the chat a link to the text for today as well as a PDF, so people have options. You can use either one. I mean, I will be share at some point. I will be sharing the screen as well and share the PDF. So use whatever feels best. And I'm gonna mute myself again, and then we'll come back in about 5 minutes.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. Everybody, yeah, just waiting a few more minutes as people are still joining.
Okay.
We'll probably start in a few minutes. I'm putting, for those of you who just joined, I just put the link to the text in the chat as well as the PDF, and I will keep sharing it over the next few minutes, again and again, until everyone who joins has it. But yeah, how are you, Barbara?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm in Baltimore actually right now, so I am teaching from my friend's basement.
Wonderful.
Yeah, but it's great.
Let's...
I'm just gonna send the text to Susan.
Got it. I'm trying to open.
You have trouble opening it? PDF or the link?
Oh, got it. No, it's open.
I just downloaded the PDF. I downloaded it to the hard drive and opened it that way.
Amazing.
Did you teach it in Minneapolis about half a dozen years ago at Bethel Synagogue?
I did.
I was there. Oh my God.
Minneapolis, or I think it was St. Louis Park. I think it
St.
was
Louis Park. Yes.
I
Oh
did.
my
I
God.
did. We did a whole Shavuot dance.
Yes, yes.
That was the most I ever taught in one weekend. I remember preparing 9 different source sheets for that one weekend.
Oh my
It was
God.
very nice.
I was so blown away. I'm so honored to be studying with you, really.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just gonna give it. I see there's still people joining, so we're gonna give it a few more minutes. I think 7:35, 5 minutes is enough to get all the stragglers for an online class, and then we'll start. I imagine more people will join us, but hi, Linda, Judy, Jessica. Love seeing all the familiar faces and the new faces. I'm gonna put the actually when we start at 2 minutes, I will put the PDF again, and then if people join after, Susan will put in the PDF, the link. Okay, amazing. Just give it 2 more minutes. Not I don't even know how many people registered. I have no idea if we're still waiting for people, but I imagine, and usually a lot of people who are registered don't come, so that's not probably not the best matrix. But
Yeah, there's it's probably about another 10 who registered.
okay.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
10 people not showing up sounds about normal.
yeah.
So then I guess I will jump in then. So let me just one final time I'm gonna share the PDF and then hopefully everyone has it. Okay, so before I do, I want to do some brief introductions with everyone as well. But before I do that, sorry, I have some allergies, so I apologize in advance. Before I do that, I have um, actually first and foremost a bit of a housekeeping request. So I know there's some of us who have not turned on your videos, and you do not have to turn it on if you don't feel comfortable. But if you do feel comfortable, I encourage you to turn your video on. I really like it. I will also say that we really don't care how you look and how you're dressed. I'm sure you're beautiful. But as long as you are decent, even if you wear PJs, at which point I might be a bit jealous, but do feel free to turn your video on. I feel like it creates more of a physical classroom. And I know we like our last during the fall and winter, we did this in person, and then we decided it would be better to move on Zoom because we would have half in person, half on Zoom, and the people on Zoom felt like it wasn't fully engaging on Zoom. So now we're doing it all here. So yeah, if you feel comfortable turning on your video, do so. Now, for those of you who are new to any of my classes and you haven't been to any of the other ones, we're going to do a similar structure to how I like to do, which is that I don't talk the whole time. I do like talk. I was going to lie and say I don't like talking a lot, but that's a lie. I do like talking a lot, but I also like listening a lot. So we'll have people read different parts. So for those of you who just have the link, they're not going to be numbered. So we'll just have to follow along. If you have the PDF, they do have numbers, so you can just follow along like and know where we are based on the numbers, but either one is fine. The benefit of the link is that you also have more control over it. You can blow it up on your computer. You can make it smaller. Ezra, I really love that you're in your PJs. It's amazing. Anyway, um, now before I go into an introduction to the introduction to Kabbalah, how about an introduction to why we're here? So in the past, kind of like Chevrutah sessions that we did, which were 3 sessions on Hasidic text through a modern lens. And it kept coming up a lot of Kabbalistic teachings, and for those of you who were part of that class, you will see that some of the text today might look a tiny bit familiar because we have gotten through some of them, but it kept coming up kind of like Kabbalah, what Kabbalah is. You can't really do Hasidic text without Kabbalah. For those of you who read the description of this class, you also know that a lot of customs that people might think are not necessarily Kabbalistic actually are. The most common one being Kabbalat Shabbat, the whole concept of Lechuna Ranana, like all the songs. If you've ever been to any synagogue of any denomination, Ashkenazi or Sephardic or Middle Eastern, you have interacted with Kabbalat Shabbat that is an addition, a Kabbalistic edition, and so on. There's many, many more. Point being, we have all interacted with Kabbalah, whether you realize it or not. So it came out, and the people who were at the last class also expressed a strong interest in it. So here we are, Kabbalah 101. Now, I'm going to also, throughout this time, I will be sharing, at some point, specifically when we have people reading text directly, I will share my screen. So you also have it on your screen. But then in between text, as we discuss it, I will not be sharing it. So again, if you want to, like, at any point, go back to it, have it open on a second tab or have the PDF, and so on. One other thing, we're going to have different people read. I think I mentioned that before. It's popcorn style. If you do want to read something and someone starts talking before you have a chance, I want to invite you to raise your hand if you look at the bottom of your screen on the reactions, there's an option to raise your hand. So if you do that, I will know that you wanted to read, and I can call on you to read the next text right after that. So before I start, I mean, it's a bit hard to do that on Zoom, and also I thought we were going to have 10 people. We have more than double of that. So I don't think we have time to go through introductions, and I know on Zoom it will take up too much of our time. But I want to invite everyone to put in the chat, if you can, your name, if you can put pronouns, I will ask two more things about you. Where you are calling in from or where you live. And I also would love to hear if you are a member of the new Shul, if you are new. I think Susan would also, who is our director, who you can see here, would also love to know if you are new, so we can maybe grab you. Not required, but we might. So yeah, so put in, if you can put in that. The other thing I will ask is a question about this. And for that, I will like to have 3 people. So everyone could put it in the chat, but I would love to have 3 people actually share with everyone talking what you do know or don't know about Kabbalah. So you're coming into this class, obviously, assuming that no one forced you to be here. You saw the description and you were like, this sounds like a great way to spend my Tuesday evening. So I'm very curious to hear. We'll get 3 answers for people talking, but everyone could put in the chat. What brings you in here? Like, did you know a lot about Kabbalah and you want to get like an actual one-on-one course? Do you know absolutely nothing about it? Or so on, anything like that. So if anyone feels comfortable sharing that with the class, if you can raise your hand, or just honestly start talking. Hopefully we don't talk over each other. But I know that a lot of you have thoughts on that. So if you feel comfortable sharing why you are here, I would love to hear that. Anyone? Any volunteers? Joy, go for it.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm honored to be studying with you. I also teach Kabbalah. I've been teaching for many years, and my latest,
now I'm afraid.
No. I learned from everybody. I mean, everybody gives me more information. My favorite class is Kabbalah and the Wizard of Oz because the 4 worlds are connected to the 4 characters and it grounds it. But I love to see how other people teach. I learn from everybody. So I'm just here to learn.
Thank you. So I think what you will find, for me, it will obviously be very focused on Hasidic teachings, which is the world I'm coming from, but also the humanistic part. I've been doing a lot of work and a lot of thinking more than anything else on seeing Kabbalah as, most importantly, people looking on the world and trying to make sense of this, this mess that we call our home. And how so much of it, like, it's very easy to get lost in the, let's even dare to say, mumble jumble of like all the like sfirot and all the worlds and all the different things, when at least in my opinion, and what we'll focus a lot specifically in the other 2 classes, this will be a bit of an intro of the realities in it and how like the customs are developed out of a simple reality of life and trying to make sense of that. But thank you so much. It's an honor to have you here. Anyone else? Ezra, go ahead.
Yeah, so my knowledge of Kabbalah, as a kid, I was fascinated by it conceptually because it sounded like magic and spells, and that sounded fun. But I also like knew I have a vague concept of like you're not supposed to study it until you're like married and 40 and have kids and are a man. So like it's felt very like forbidden, but like deeply intriguing.
Well, I will say, I only fill in one of those. I have a child, but I'm not a man, and I'm not 40. And I will say, though, I did study Kabbalah before. One of my favorite things to tell people about that is the Ari, Rabbi Isaac Luria, who's considered the father of modern Kabbalah, died at the age of 36. So, and in many ways, also, obviously, yes, there are some people who say that. I think as a rebel myself, as a proud rebel myself, I think a lot of times why that is said is because the history has shown that the people who like want to study Kabbalah tend to be like, in Hebrew there's a term for them, mevakshim, people who are looking for something, people who are seeking. And I think that in a lot of communities they were concerned that people like that if people go through mysticism and they were like, I still don't have the answers that I want, they're gonna go seek in other places. Versus if you tell people you can't study it until a certain age, there's always something to point to and be like, there's still something you don't understand. And it's just my personal opinion on that matter. But I'm happy to see that this room is more than half not man, and a lot of people who are under 40, and probably a lot of people who don't have kids, and that's beautiful. And I'm glad you're all here. Anyone else? One more person. One more intro. Why you're here?
Hi,
Go
Joni.
for it, Joni. Yes.
I think that in a way, Kabbalah is the first thing that really intrigued me as an uneducated Jewish person. In other words, I had no real formal Jewish education. Yeah, but no. And I was fascinated by it and really drawn by the mysticism and the spirituality of it. And then I kind of like sort of like drifted from that. But I'm very, very fascinated to learn it in a more deep way. And
Thank you.
that's it.
That's very helpful. Well, thank you all so much. Now one final like housekeeping, and then we'll move into. I will try to like take a break after every few texts and like open. I'll be like questions of any kind for what we have just read. However, if at any point I say something you don't understand, so not like a question, but more like a, let's call that a clarifying question, where you're like, what's that word you just used? I do want to encourage you to stop me at any point. I think like it can be either Susan or anyone else. Like I'm not gonna be able to monitor the chat the whole time, but if anyone puts a question that is clarifying, what did that mean? You missed something or so on, I will stop for that at any point. And if there's other more broader questions, we'll do that. We'll make time to stop. You can see there's a lot of text on the source sheet, but we have 2 more classes. We do not have to get through all of those. And I will prepare other source sheets, but as those who have been to my other classes know, I don't mind reprinting some of the same text on the source sheets if we don't get to it. So take your time. Like if you have something that you want to ask when I say, does anyone have any questions? Please feel free to ask. I want this to be an engaging and an open moment. Okay.
Can you repeat the name of who you said was the father of modern Kabbalah?
So he's known by the title Da'ari, A-R-I, which means the lion, but his full name was Rabbi Isaac Luria. He lived in the 16th century in Tzfat.
Would you mind putting that into the chat? Abby?
Sure, I can do that in the chat. Let's
Thank
do
you.
that.
Could you increase the size of the text?
Yes, I will do that in a second. But
Okay.
also again, like the link if you have access to the link, you can play around with it on your own, but I'm just gonna put the name in the text. So you can all
Gloria. Okay. Thank you.
so yeah, I believe I can increase the text. Is this better, Robert?
Oh, that's perfect.
Okay, amazing. So I want to read the first part, and this is like just a basic introduction, not necessarily to Kabbalah, but to the concepts of mysticism that make up Kabbalah to begin with. And as you can read in English, what is Kabbalah? What is mysticism? And I think it's maybe not by chance, but the concept of mysticism, like what is considered even mysticism, sometimes feels very mystical. So what does that even mean when we're talking about it? So there's 3 terms that I brought together from different kind of definitions that are things that basically Kabbalah could fall under. And I apologize, my pronunciation on English words isn't the best sometimes, and I apologize in advance. Theosophy refers to systems of esoteric philosophy concerning or seeking direct knowledge of presumed mysteries of being and nature, particularly concerning the nature of the divine. So this is one of the definitions of what mysticism and ultimately also what Kabbalah tries to do, is trying to gain knowledge to know God itself, to know what it means, to know the mysteries, but not in the sense of, oh, there's a God and God wants me to do X, Y, and Z, but rather, what is God? How is God? Who is God? Why is God? Those kind of questions would you fall under what's called in English theosophy, and then it's a big part of what Kabbalah tries to answer. The second one is esoteric, which understood by or meant for only the select few who have special knowledge or interest, intended to be revealed only to the initiates of the group. So this definition is a big reason why we get the term Kabbalah. So when you see the word esoteric, it refers to a tradition, to teachings that are by definition meant to be kept a secret, to be kept a mystery. So when we talk about Jewish mysticism, it doesn't just mean that it's mystical to understand it, but that it has, in some points, intentionally been kept a mystery. similar to what you heard from Ezra saying, like, you're not supposed to read it until you're 40, you're not supposed to read it unless there's like a whole list of things you have to be. Kabbalah also, the literal definition of it in Hebrew means receiving. And at least in the early years, and basically up to the 16th century, it was said that the exact definitions and like the base, like while there's a lot of teachings that are Kabbalistic, that are mystic, a basic intro, like a Kabbalah 101 class was taught to believe should not exist, as in it should be only received one from the other, as opposed to be written down. But starting in the 16th century, that was one of the big things that what's called Lurianic Kabbalah, on the name of Rabbi Isaac Luria, that started doing was to start writing it down, and we'll see one of those texts in a minute that make it a lot more accessible to basically everyone. But that is also one of the big things of esoteric of Kabbalah. Then we get the Greek term gnosis. Gnosis generally signifies spiritual knowledge or religion of knowledge in the sense of mystical enlightenment or insight. Gnosis taught a deliverance of men from the constraint. Gnosis here referring to a specific man that the ideology of Gnosis is named after, taught a deliverance of men from the constraints of earthly existence through insight into an essential relationship as soul or spirit, which is, I can never pronounce that word in its Wikipedia, but with a place of freedom. So basically, another big part of what Kabbalah is knowledge to truly understand who we are beyond our physical constraints. So beyond our blood, beyond our flesh and blood, beyond our physical body, trying to understand what is more that there is to humanity. So these are basically three different definitions of different form of mysticism, all of which, and you can find a lot more. But I think these three on its own are so heavy as it is. But these are three basic definitions that everyone can understand that are all parts and elements of what Kabbalah is and what Kabbalah is trying to do. I'm going to stop this for a second and check in. Any questions? Anything we don't understand before we continue? Like, are you all clear now what Kabbalah is trying to do? You don't have to understand anything else other than what I've literally had someone text me at after one of my classes that was not on Kabbalah, but when I mentioned Kabbalah, and that person literally was, WTF is Kabbalah? And how can you, as someone who grew up in a very religious community, think that it's something that is still interesting to anyone else? But I think when you understand what Kabbalah is trying to answer, you understand that at the core, it's humanity trying to make sense of the universe. Linda, go ahead.
Just a very quick question. You said Isaac Luria was in the 16th century. He's the one who wrote it
Yes.
down and made it accessible. But when did it evolve historically?
Okay, so first, Isaac Luria didn't actually write down anything. That's the interesting thing. It was written. It's what we have today is writings by his student, and specifically his closest student, by the name of Rabbi Chaim Vital, who wrote down specifically 8 books, who are named as the 8 doors. They're published. But they were the teachings of the Ari, the teachings of Rabbi Isaac Luria, and he was instructed to write it. The origins of that could literally, like, it's a combination, and like you can see the 16th century as a culmination. Like you can see the Ari, as I will call him from now on, like Rabbi Isaac Luria, as rather someone who compiled rather than came up with new ideas. He came up with a lot of new ideas, but most of it are based on earlier ideas of Jewish mysticism, some of which go back to the Torah, to the Bible, specifically the Sefer Yechezkel, the book of Ezekiel, where it talks about God's throne and like all the angels and so on. So parts of this go back literally to the beginning of Judaism. There is a text that was published around the same time as the Mishnah. So we're talking about 1800 years ago during the 2nd century, called Sifrei Heichalot, or people say, which literally means the books of the, how they translate Heichal. Heichal means like big holes, the books of the holes of the divine, of the cosmos, which are probably the earliest compilation of books that are just mystical. And then it slowly evolves more and more and more. And then you get to the 13th century where you get the Zohar, which is a book published in the 13th century. Also, again, a compilation, like it includes things that are a lot older than that. But that basically became I sometimes call it the Bible of Kabbalah, kind of the foundation stones. And that is written in Aramaic, was published out of Spain in the 13th century. And then from there to kind of like this, the teachings of the Ari are very heavily based on the Zohar. Zohar literally means light or shining or brightening up, the shine that comes out. But again, like throughout Jewish history, there were different people who were more invested in it, some people who were more, some people less, but it wasn't new. The Ari didn't invent it, obviously, but also most of his ideas were, you can already find at least allusions to it, and at least parts of it in earlier texts going back to the Bible. Okay. Let's get to some actual text. Just a second. Okay. So talking of those teachings, those books from Rabbi Isaac Luria, from Dari. The opener, kind of the first book of those 8 books written by his student Reb Chaim Vital, of the teachings of Dari, is called Eitz Chaim. Literally, it means the tree of life, and also named after himself, as that was his name. I'm actually gonna skip the first one. I'm not gonna read or translate because I have the exact same text in the next text. I wanted to put this in more for the translation. So this one I did and this is a bit more of some of the other work that I've done. I did a gender neutral language for God in that specific translation. My ultimate goal is to have all my texts translated in that way. I haven't gotten around to all of them yet, but I wanted to put that out there and make a note that that's important to me. And I think that's also something that is a given in Kabbalistic texts, because in Kabbalah, there's feminine aspects of God, there's masculine aspects of God, but God itself is ultimately genderless. But that's why I wanted to put that in. We're going to jump to the next one.
Oh.
Now, I'm going to invite a volunteer to read this text. So this is basically, in addition to the book Eitz Chaim, which is the introduction, the Kabbalah 101 of the 16th century, there's a book called Otzrot Chaim, which means the treasures of Chaim, which basically takes the very complicated original text, and this is written just a few decades later, and condenses it a bit, makes it a bit easier to digest. But as you will see, it's still very intense. I will invite a volunteer to read. If you want to try to read what looks like Hebrew, you are welcome to do so. This is barely Hebrew. It's more Aramaic than it's Hebrew, like most Kabbalistic texts. And it will be quite hard to read. But whoever volunteers to read it, if you want to read a Hebrew, you can try. Otherwise, we'll just go to the English. Anyone? Any volunteers, just try talking. I can't really see everyone because I'm looking at the text. So if you want to volunteer, do that. Otherwise, I'm going to start calling on people.
I am happy to read the English.
Go for it.
Okay. Know that the beginning of all in the universe, all the matter in the world was simple light, what is called Ein Sof, no end. And they were not any empty spaces or any empty air. And when it came up in his mind, God, to delegate or inspire to the inspired for the known reason, and that is to be called merciful, gracious, slow to anger, etc. Because if there was no one in the world to whom to give mercy, how will the divine be called merciful? And so on. Then the divine restricted the divine self in the middle of its shining light, in the center of its middle point, and there the divine light was restricted to the sides and the surroundings and left an empty space, empty of the divine light in the middle.
Wow.
Look, I need to stop for a second because there's a lot that just happened. But this is the basic, literally the basic intro to like someone writing a book and be like, why am I here? Why am I talking? Why am I writing a book? And they were like, I want you to explain how the world works and how the light that exists in the world, both in well, here they're talking more in a metaphorical sense, that the light of the divine that exists in the world. First and foremost, there's a question, the question, why is there something rather than nothing? The Kabbalistic answer to that question is quite simple. First, there was everything that was ultimately nothing. And that is something that we're going to get to in the next sessions that becomes more Hasidic, but in the beginning, everything was just never-ending light, which also means that in any conventional sense, the only way we can define the existence of something is if there is a way to define where it doesn't exist. I can tell you that this is a cup because there's only one cup here. If all you could ever see with your eyes were a lot of cups, there would be no way for me to define that this is a cup because this is just all there is. So at the beginning, there's everything, which is all the same thing, which ultimately also means that from the perspective of a human mind or the perspective of any mind, there's absolutely nothing. And the divine, which, let's be honest for a second, if everything is just light, what exactly is the divine? No answer, just hold on to that. Just hold on to that. Just as a question. But the divine decided that it wants to be nice, literally. And it realized that if you go out into the desert and you start cooking a huge meal and you want to be really nice and feed people, but there's no one around to eat, you're not being nice because no one is eating your nice food. So if you want to, specifically the word that it is using, you want to be mashpia, you want to inspire, you want to provide, it needs to be someone to provide to. But then we get to another problem. I want to provide, but there's no space. Imagine you want to, you have the best possible flashlight that provides a lot of light, and you want to go and give people that light, and you go outside, and you are again in the desert on a shiny summer morning, and your flashlight is useless. You can't be nice. You once again cannot provide because what you're trying to provide, it's everywhere. You can't, nothing can exist. To go back to the everything, if everything is the same, nothing else can exist. If all there exists is this pure light, nothing else can exist. So we need first to create what we're going to call, what's called, and it's like, this should be the first term that you take away from this, something called a tzimtzum.
Say again.
Tzimtzum. Very hard, I think, possibly. I'm not a native English speaker, so it might be a bit hard for English speakers to pronounce, but it's a Hebrew word that basically means constriction. For example, if you have a belt and you want to make it tight, it basically, you are doing a tzimtzum, you are tightening your belt, and so on. Thank you, Joy. And this is a very important concept, because at no point does it say that God went and was like, you know what, I'm gonna do like Control X on some of this. I'm gonna delete some of the light. That isn't possible. And if you want to think about this light being ultimately what becomes the divine in this context, you can't delete it, you can't take it away. What you could do is you could constrict it. Like a rubber, you know, when you can turn it into a tiny ball and make more, but the same rubber is still there, it just takes up less space. It's like a balloon. You can use numerous metaphors. The concept was that God said, you know what, the divine, I think is a better term at this moment, or this Ein Sof, which ultimately becomes another name for God in Kabbalah, this never-ending light, decided to restrict itself. Constrict might be a better term. Basically taking all the light that exists, not deleting anything, not getting rid of it, but rather constricting it, creating an empty hole. This empty space is ultimately where the entire existence will, exist. All the world, all the cosmos, everything that exists, the entire universe, the known universe, goes into this tiny in the relative idea of infinite amount of light, which is what Ein Sof, never-ending light, means. But in that tiny place, basically, where there is now, we're going to get in a minute to what happens after that, but now the light, the all Ein Sof, the never-ending light, is constricted. It's no longer in this space. We now have an empty space. Are we good? How are we doing?
Yeah.
I feel like I might have missed something in the chat right now, but can anyone tell me if there's something that I need to look at, or it's just people clarifying things?
Could you just say the last thing you said again, please, about constricting and not?
So basically that what's called this like never ending, this infinite light of the divine has constricted, has removed itself and created, I think a good way of looking at it is a vacuum. So when you have you have like a bag that you want to vacuum, you take out the air from it, correct? So you didn't destroy the air, you simply removed it from a specific place, and that place now has no air. This is now a space that is empty of air, or think of it of light. I don't know. I'm sure there are some scientific ways of doing that. I'm trying to imagine a way of creating darkness in the middle of the day. But envision you are outside, a summer day, a clear day, everywhere is light, and you somehow manage to create a circle, which we're going to see later, but that's how they see it, a circle. They create a circle where there is no light. There is now an empty space. And one other detail we'll add to that, nothing really can exist in that empty space. And now we get to a bit of a contradiction, because I've explained before that nothing could exist when everything was light. So like if you have a room full of these glasses, you can't add anything else to it. So now we remove some, but now we're at a point where it's pure darkness. And again, we're back to the beginning where nothing can exist. Now I want to, before Amy, I will get to your question in a second, but I want to add one final thing. I hope that after today, you come back to the next two classes, because that's where it's going to get really important. Because I feel today is going to be a lot of these ideas, and some of you, and I can already imagine in your heads, you're all like, what is she talking about? Like, why do I care about this? Is this even real? Does this even matter? Why do I care? As the description of this event said, we're going to look at this ultimately through a modern and a humanistic lens. But that's going to be probably not be today. We'll get to it a bit, but I do want to bring this home for a second. And imagine there's a concept in the Talmud, which Kabbalah relies a lot on, which is ta'anuk, timidi, and no ta'anuk. A pleasure that lasts always isn't a pleasure. Try to imagine any pleasure that you have in your life. Anything. Imagine the best taste of food. Now imagine you eating that food nonstop. Imagine you loving sleep, but you sleeping nonstop. And so on. Something, it can be the best thing that you like to do in the world. Ultimately, it's not a pleasure. You don't enjoy anything if it's everywhere and if it's always. That human nature is at least in part, and at least one of the interpretations of this exact scenario. We're trying to understand the world. So for a second, let us stop and think of how the world works. There are good things, there are bad things. We have good days, we have bad days. There's good and there is bad. And you start seeing there's light and there's darkness. And your first question wants to be, oh, in the beginning, it was all never-ending light. Why can't we always have that? The reality of humanity, and I'm not an anthropologist or an evolutionary biologist, so I can't really answer you why humans are set up like that. But humans, and as far as I know, everything that exists needs to have, and this is maybe a harsh statement, but it's the reality, we need to have an understanding of joy that is by definition defined by something that isn't the same kind of joy.
Right.
In order, we only have a concept of light because we have darkness. If there was no darkness, we wouldn't call it light. It would just be, and so on. So even this concept that we just started with is ultimately at the core human nature making sense of the world. Amy, go ahead.
I'm struggling wrapping my mind around how there can be any place where the divine isn't.
We're gonna get to that.
Okay.
No, we barely touched the first block. Okay. We started out with everything was light, and now we're like creating a vacuum. So we are in the middle of the process. We're building the world together. And now we are in the vacuum part. There's more coming. God, it was just a pause. It was by far not a stop. But thank you. You're getting it. Now you're seeing the question that these Kabbalists were having, trying to make sense of the world. They were like, We can't have constant joy. We can't have constant light. We can't have constant darkness. So hold on, what's going on? And that's what we're getting. I love it because we're doing this together. I love it.
Thank you.
Any other questions before I continue?
Yeah.
Joni and then Don. Yeah.
My mind is spinning.
That's okay. That
no, I
just
mean,
as-
not in a bad way. I mean, this is really igniting me and bringing back a lot of memories because I mean, I did study this, you know, kind of thoroughly at a certain point, as I said. What you're speaking of now, it's kind of like, in a way, it's a very, what is posited is a binary universe, right? And you were talking about the Tzum, right?
It seems
Which
so,
is
yeah.
the expulsion of the light, okay? Which is the exhale in the Tzimtzum, right? And you were sort of like, are you going to get to the Tzimtzum?
Oh, we're barely started. We're gonna get to all of that. Yeah. We're gonna, everything you were saying is great because you were like, I know, like you're getting it.
Yeah.
We're gonna get to all of this. We're gonna get to whether there is a binary. I see that some people are already asking about light. Like, does this relate to good and evil? In some people's mind, it does. To other people, we'll see in a minute, it doesn't. Well, in a minute, by a minute, I mean at the end of the third session. But all of these are great questions. So all of these things are good. All it's telling me is that you're following along and you're getting it. So all of these questions you were having, perfect. Those were the exact questions the Kabbalists were having.
Absence and presence, yin and yang.
Yeah, all of these, and I love what you just said, yin and yang, also because you will see, Kabbalah is not unique. Though my father would kill me for saying that, but it's not unique. Something you can find in every religion and in every tradition. Yes. Because again, at the core, it is people trying to make sense of the world around us. And we're getting there. This was just the first part, not even the first part. This was the first tip.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's continue.
So, Rabbi, can you say something about where this knowledge or understanding comes from? Is it based on empirical evidence, or is it somehow extracted from the Torah or other texts?
Oh, John, I love what you just did because you basically introduced the next text. Thank you. That's amazing. Thank you. Yes. Here's where, at least in part, where it comes from. Can I get any volunteers to read literally the first 5 verses of the Torah?
Oh, yes, I'll read.
Go for it. Do you want to do the Hebrew or English? Just English?
English, yes.
Okay, great.
When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the face of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, a first day.
I assume many of you have seen those verses before, but I think with everything we have just said, it's right. Like, you can now wonder, how did anyone not see this to begin with? It seems right there. In the beginning, there was nothingness. And as I explained before, nothingness, everything, it's basically the same thing because there's nothing to define one thing against the other. There was just a giant void. Nothing could exist in it. So first thing that we need is we need light. So now there is light, but with light on its own, we're still not good. We also need darkness. And now we need a separation between the light and the darkness. And now that there's a separation, we can define them one against the other because now we have night and now we have day and now we have an understanding of what's going on here.
Yeah.
So
in a
if
very
I
strong way,
may,
this was their interpretation of those verses. At least like looking at those verses, and this is where we get to the point where Kabbalah becomes even more about our day-to-day experiences as human beings than even like, it basically is Kabbalah trying to make sense, because now, instead of just looking at the Torah and seeing here some religious text, They saw a human text. They saw people doing exactly what they were doing right now, making sense of the universe. There is nothingness, there's everything. Neither one of those is good. You need some separation. We need a whole. And also we can define one against the other. And we have a day. Just a second, I'm gonna check the chat. Okay. I think we're good. I think we've answered the question a bit of like where that comes from. And I want to push ahead a bit to get a few more texts in, and then we'll do questions. But let's keep going. Okay. Just a second. I'm thinking if I need to. I think I'm gonna skip the next few texts just because it's more on the question of what is God and definition of God. Maybe we'll come back to it at a later point. But I think for now, I would rather just move ahead. It's not important to what comes after necessarily. If it comes up, we'll come back to it. Okay, so as I've already said, I was gonna introduce that, but people already asked. So Isaac Luria was born in 1534, died in 1572. He's known as the Ha'ari, the Lion, or the Holy Ari, or Arizal, which are all different terms from him. He was born in Jerusalem and died in Tzfat. He came from a family that was a mix of his mother was part of came from Spain, was expelled from Spain during the expulsion in 1492, and his father was Ashkenazi, which is actually why his name was Isaac Luria Ashkenazi. And then he lived in Tzfat. But I wanted to add this quote of Gershon Shalom. Luria's new myth is concentrated in three great symbols: the Tzimtzum, or self-limitation of God. We already had that one. Now let's add two more. Are we ready? Okay. I'm going to stop sharing for a second so I can try to visualize. And for those of you who can see me, I encourage you to pay attention. So some of you already asked the question. If there's emptiness, how can anything exist there? Is there no God in there? How can anything exist without a divine light? So let me give you the next few chapters of the book that we had in the initial quote, Otzat Chaim, and I will try to do it in just 2 minutes, or maybe a bit less. And I will try to find there's some visuals online that could help a bit, but let me try to do it like this, and we'll see if we figure it out. So envision now the empty space that we have, correct? There's an empty space where there is no God, not no God, but there is no light. It's empty. The problem right now is that nothing can exist in here either. So we had everything, now we have nothing, and we're still not there because there's nothing, and there's no light, there's no energy, there's no water, there's nothing can exist in it. So now what basically needs to happen is we need to create plumbing.
We need to create what?
We need plumbing. We need plumbing. We need pipes. We have an empty sphere that has nothing in it, and we need pipes. We need somehow to bring part of that infinite light into this empty space without it overwhelming the empty space. So basically you have a house that has no water. You want to bring water in, but you are not just going to dig a giant hole to the ocean, because if you do that, it's going to flood. So you need to think of a way of how to do it in a measured way. So we get something, this is a term that if you don't remember, don't worry about it, but something called a tzino, which literally means a pipe. But basically envision an empty sphere. And now we're going to poke a tiny hole at one side and put in a pipe. Okay? And through this pipe, this never-ending light could come through. And all of this is going to come home at the end of this, but just the understanding of the visual understanding of all of this. And now the light could come out of the pipe in in a somehow measured way, fill this empty space so we can actually create. We can have a healthy amount of energy that isn't going to electrocute anyone, but can actually exist. But here's the problem. I imagine we were all children, and then I imagine we were all told at some point not to take a fork and put it into the electric outlet.
Yeah.
Electricity, even in a measured amount, our sockets here in the US give out 120 watts. It's really, really not a lot. If you don't know how to take it, it's still going to kill you. It's still going to go bad. You need to have the correct tools, or what we're going to see in Kabbalistic terms, the correct kelim, the correct vessels to be able to take that in. So now we have a pipe. Are we all clear on that? We got the empty space. We got a pipe coming in here, and now we need the correct vessels to receive it. You need a correct outlet. You know, when you travel overseas, you need a different kind of outlet because you don't have to collect the correct outlet to receive the energy. You need the correct way to receive it. Now, in the Zohar, most of the Zohar is written, at least according to the interpretations of the Ari, most of the Zohar is written in what I'm going to explain in the next 2 minutes. But most of Kabbalah does not live in that world. So if you're looking for 2 minutes not to pay attention, now is an okay-ish time, but not really, because it is going to become important. But we are going to have a first way, a first form of how the light can be perceived, which is basically 10 filters, 10 vessels that it goes through. And it simply in this scenario, it just filters through. So let's just use random numbers so we can visualize it. There's 100 watts of God light, let's call it 100 watts of godliness, 100 watts of godliness coming out of the pipe. And at the moment, we need to filter it. So it goes through all those vessels, and slowly it will filter through all those 10 vessels and ultimately get out kind of like out of the plug, and you can actually use it. But here's what happens, and this is where this becomes a bit more important. We got a pipe, we got the vessels. The first vessel, which we're gonna randomly call Keter, and I imagine that some of you know this isn't random, but we're gonna call this crown. We're gonna name this vessel crown. Keter is like a imagine dry sand. So Keter is made of dry sand that is really thirsty. And you give the light to Keter, and Keter is like, I'm taking all 100 watts and I'm not leaving anything for anyone. And it all goes in. So imagine how Keter from a vessel becomes a balloon. That might help a bit understanding it. It gets really blown up. And then the Ein Sof, the light at the end of this is like, excuse me, you are not the intended participant. Like, don't end there. Like the wire of your computer isn't the intended recipient of the volt of the electricity. It's the computer. And if your wire just takes all the electricity and doesn't push it further, nothing is going to work. And the divine goes, hey, excuse me, this is not enough. You need to pass it on. So this giant vessel that has been blown up now needs to get rid of everything. If you take sand that has been dry, it's just dry sand, but then you make it wet and then you dry it out again, what happens? It doesn't just become the same sand again. Well, if it gets fully dry, we're not talking here vacuum dry, but you start having cracks like in a desert. But however you want to imagine this, imagine a giant balloon that you fill up to the brink and then you take out all the air from it. It busts. It breaks. And this keeps happening with all 10 of these vessels. Everyone just wants everything. The pipe gets in the vessels and everyone just wants to take all the voltage, all the light that they can get. And when they're told to, hey, yo, no, you need to pass it on, they break. Because they've taken everything, they've blown up, they need to pass on, they break. We're back to the beginning. We got a pipe, yes, but we don't have any good filters because all the filters wanted everything, they're now broken. Are we all clear on that? Not questions yet, but just are we clear on what I've said?
So all the filters are now broken?
Yeah, this is the situation where we are right now. All the vessels are broken. All the vessels that have taken all this divine light, they're now broken. And we basically need to start from scratch.
They broke because they overflowed.
They broke because, yeah, because they wanted everything. I don't know why I'm blanking on the word in English, but they had too much ta'ava. They had too much lust. They just wanted everything. It's fine if you have questions. That's okay. But just as long as you understand where we are. We are at a pipe with a lot of broken vessels. And this is where we get to two more terms in Kabbalah that basically become the core of it. The Shevira, the breaking of the vessels, and then finally we get to the Tikkun, the harmonious correction and mending of the flow of which came into the world, of the flaw that came into the world through the Shevira. So we got all the breaking, and now we are reaching what Kabbalah is basically focused mostly on. The idea of Tikkun, correcting and building better vessels. Any of you ever heard the term Tikkun Olam? Correcting the world? This is where it comes from. Now you know its real origins. Concept of Tikkun Olam begins here. Begins in the Kabbalistic idea of the broken vessels. Which, to be honest, if I am allowed to bring this home a tiny bit, is once again humanity looking around and being with all the light, with all the good in the world. This is broken. This isn't really working. This is broken. It isn't really working. Some people are taking too much. They're not leaving anything for anyone else. And if you try to break their system, everything just breaks and falls apart. We need to fix it. We need to focus on the tikkun. And this is where we reach the moment where Kabbalah is mostly focused on. To build all those vessels and how you work with them. So I will stop for a second now to take some questions before we continue. The rest of the texts are mostly going to be in English. Written intentionally, I chose texts written by kind of modern people, so it will be easier, and most importantly, native English speakers, which I'm not. So hopefully it will be a bit easier to understand. But before we do that, do you all understand all the problems? So far, we just have problems. We don't have the tikkun yet. We know that we need a tikkun, which means fixing. We need to fix something, but we only have problems. And if your question relates to what is the solution, hold on to it. We don't know the solutions yet. But do we all understand what the problem is? Do we understand where we are standing?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Amazing. Okay. Don, go ahead.
I'm not clear how the what the vessels are or how they relate to humanity.
Okay, the easiest way to think of the vessels is to think of it as a filter. Without using too many metaphors, it is basically something that filters through the light, this what's called the Ein Sof, this never-ending light. It filters through this light in a way that we can perceive it. Let me use an example that one of my teachers used when I started Kabbalah for the first time. Have you ever seen stained glass windows, very common in churches and synagogues, right? One of the earliest reasons why it started wasn't just for the beauty of it, it was to literally filter through the light. Same reason why we have window shades. The same reason why we don't stare directly into the light, or if there's a solar eclipse, you need special glasses to be able to look at the sun, because looking directly into the light is going to blind you. Does that make sense? So imagine these vessels as being the filters, the stained glass, the window shade, the sunglasses that you wear, because looking directly into the light you can't really perceive it. If you stare directly into the sun for too long, literally everything becomes dark because you cannot perceive it. So the vessels, the easiest way that I think to think of these vessels is as filters. They're filtering through. And just keep in mind, here we're talking about life itself, we're talking about humanity, we're talking about everything we have. So we'll understand that in order to create functional filters, there's a lot that's required. Does that help? Do you understand? Does that make sense?
Somewhat. So then you said that the vessels are broken. So does that mean that the filters are imperfect? That
Yes, that's exactly what it means. The filters are not broken.
So does this
I will
imply,
add one final thing though before I continue. As those vessels broke, as those filters broke, they didn't release all of it. So think of it as you take a cup that has water in it and you break it. Most of the water is going to leave the cup, but there's going to be a few drops that are going to stay on the cup. So imagine of the light being in those vessels. The vessels are broken. Most of the light is released in a way that we can work with. But now there's some of the light that is still, let's call it, trapped within those vessels. Tiny sparks of light that are left within those vessels. That will all make more sense in a minute, but that is where we are. Joni, go ahead. Did you have a question?
so that, I actually kind of, I'm just, I can't really articulate it at the moment. I forgot kind of where I was going.
Okay, think about it, and when
Yeah.
you do, you can either write it down or just tell me, and we'll try to get back to it.
I understand completely about, the light, the Ein Sof, right?
Yeah.
Is the light, we have the breakage, and that there's these little particles of light that are still trapped within the vessels, like,
Yes.
yeah.
That's all you need to understand so far.
And that's going to need to, and I love the way you brought the concept of tikkun olam in, because I mean, it really leaves the question of the responsibility on our parts to do our
That's what we're gonna
job
get to.
constructing the universe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I will correct you on one thing. I didn't bring the term tikkun olam into this. This is where tikkun olam comes from. This is tikkun. This is the original tikkun olam. Every other place tikkun olam is basically taken from here. This is where tikkun comes from. This is the original one.
Yeah, I just had never heard that correlation.
Yeah. Most people don't. Most people don't. You're not alone. But yeah, this is where it originates.
Wow.
Okay, so let's go back. So the next few texts are mostly written in a more modern way. It should be easy to read. I will just get volunteers and read until I tell you to stop. So can we get a volunteer to start with what are the Sefirot?
I can read.
Go for it.
What are the Sefirot? The Sefirot, God emanates 10 vessels through which the world is created, called Sefirot, which are both part of God and created by God. These vessels are channels of light or water, and they are also light. They are God and of God, but they cannot define God or limit God. What is truly God is wholly beyond these descriptions, beyond the first Sephirah called Keter or crown, denoted by the term Ein Sof, without limit, without end. When the Kabbalists read stories in the Torah, every character and place represents a configuration of the Sefirot. For example, the binding of Isaac is Chesed, Avraham, overcoming Gevurah, Isaac. A secular technical term for how the Sefirot function is that they are hypostates, singular hypostasis. That is, abstract concepts imagined as beings or as parts of a reality that are more real than the physical world around us.
Okay. One of the reasons I chose this specific text as the first kind of like modern text to look at that explains the Sefirot is this way of realizing the very clear, and I think this is very important for anyone who wants to like actually relate to it, at least in a modern context. These are abstract concepts, and they are imagined. Even the Kabbalists never try to tell you that there's literally somewhere up there's a circle with a literal pipe, with literal vessels. They're imagined concepts to make sense of a reality. But basically, we got the first idea of what are the Sefirot. The Sefirot are these vessels. They literally mean counting because there's 10 of them. You count 10, but they're basically parts of this, but what this text calls God, you can literally just focus on the light, on this like limitless light that you can't really comprehend, but they're all part of this. And this is very important to the question before, when people ask, is this like good or bad, evil and God and the devil and so on? At least the way I was taught Kabbalah, from the way a lot of Hasidic understandings of it, everything, what you call God, what you call good and what you call bad, what you call God or the devil, everything is part of this Ein Sof, this never-ending light, this never-ending energy that some other people would say. And these are, the vessels are ultimately, it's another way, they're channels. They are bolts in the pipes. They are filters in the pipes. And how, like, so the last part is also focused on like how like they see everything that is happening in the world as examples of those sefirot. We don't know, we don't have to know what they are yet. We're just the concept of what they are, like you don't have to know like the exact individual 10 sefirot, but just the concept of what they are. The shortest version, they're vessels, they are channels that the light goes through and slowly gets changed or reconfigured in a very specific way. Okay. Can we have someone to do the structure of the sefirot?
Wait, I just have a, can we go back for a second? I just have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, no, chesed is kindness.
We're not there yet. Let's ignore this for now.
Ignore the chesed and the gevura?
That was just an example.
Sorry, okay.
For now, we're just telling what sefirot are, as opposed to what the sefirot are. Like, what is the concept of sefirot? We'll get to what exactly they are, the 10 of them, and so on in a minute. Okay. Who wants to read the structure of the sefirot?
I will.
Go for it.
The structure of the Sefirot. For the Zohar, an essential aspect of this world is that the Sefirot are emanated in the form of a mishkal or balance scale, with a center, right and left, which can be pictured as the form of a triangle or triad. This allowed each Sephirah to share the force of creation with those around it, so that none would shatter because of the influx of God's energy. Each of the Sephirot also contains within itself an element of all the others. Sarah Edith Schneider's term for this is that they are inter-included within each other. This fractal structure is one way in which the Sephirot are infinite or divine in their essence. Rabbi David Seidenberg, etc. Citation.
Is it specifically Joy, do you know who that is? No. I see you were shaking your head.
No.
No, okay,
like,
sorry.
I didn't want to speak it because it was like so academic to read.
Okay. So we're getting to what the sefirot are, and also, and now we've moved on a step. Ultimately, the sefirot are vessels. Another way of looking at it, they're balancing of the scale. So we had the original version where everything went bad. They were just lined up, one under the other, just 10 cups. They all take everything. There was a huge influx of this light. They shattered, they broke. We need a balance. So now we need to balance the scales. And you can stop everything else right now and summarize Kabbalah in this one word. The study of Kabbalah, the mission of Kabbalah is to find balance in the world. The way you achieve is to find there's right, there's left, there's center, and to find a way for everything to work together. And we're going to see in a minute what those sefirot are, what those vessels are. But in concept, it's all about balance and also understanding they are all connected together. They're interlinked. They are working with each other the whole time. Are we ready to actually see an example, just one? And I'm gonna warn you right now that the next slide has a wealth of information. You do not have to understand everything. You do not have to comprehend everything. If you pick up nothing other than the visual cue of how how it works, that's more than enough. I will go through them. I'll try to do it myself. Just go through all of them, very basically what they are. because ultimately they are a very human way of looking around the world and seeing there are different energies. There's feminine and masculine, which is a big part of it. There is power and strength and kindness. There is being intense and being nice. That all of these different human virtues that could sometimes maybe seem like a contradiction. The way the Kabbalists saw it, that there isn't a good person or a bad person. There aren't good natures and bad natures. There is a lot of different ways of experiencing the world. And the ultimate goal is to understand that you have great things and you have great things, and you have something that are not necessarily balanced, but there's someone else or something else that can help you balance that out. At the core, this isn't very mystical. Very weird thing to say at a Kabbalah 101 class, but at the core, this isn't very mystical. It is human. It is humanity. It is the world. It is the universe as we know it, and we just try to make sense. And the Kabbalists gave us a gift where they visualized everything. They gave names to everything. They envisioned very visual ways and visual worlds, and it could help us all kind of relate to it and understand it better. I'm going to have to zoom out a tiny bit because I want at least for a minute for everyone to see the whole figure. Oh, apparently I can't even zoom out more. Okay, so I guess there is, maybe if I click on it, no. Okay, for those of you who have the link, you can also scroll up and down. You can download the image so you can see it better. But envision, you can, some of you might also obviously see that there's a physical body. If you look in between, specifically it starts right above what's called da'at, knowledge, you will see the face. And then there's a body, because those also represent the physical body of every person. But basically, these are the sefirot. And they go, in Hebrew we call that a segel. They go 1, 2, 3, or you can see all the like lines that connect them, where basically everything connects with everything. This chart has a lot of numbers and signs on it. Some of them are not necessarily even Jewish, but they just show how they all relate to each other. I'm not going to go into everything. This will take, you can spend, I was going to say an entire semester, but I will argue you can spend an entire PhD degree on just everything that's going on in here to really understand. But we're going to do a very basic version, but I wanted to share this. It has a lot of information. Please, if you think you're going to get overwhelmed, don't read anything, just what's in the circles. Don't read anything else. But this is basically the image. So we are envisioning, if you go to the top, and I'm going to zoom in, yeah? We are envisioning the top. Oh, sorry. As being nothing. Hold on. Then we have the limitless. I'm going to ignore the next one because it's a concept that we're not going to get to right now. But basically, the limit, like R in Suf, limitless light. We got a pipe, envision the pipe being somewhere around here. And now we start having all those vessels in a measured way. We got Keter, which is the crown, the top of everything. In the it's not always even used when counting. If you try to count to 10 with these circles, you are going to be a bit surprised that there's actually 11. There are 10 sefirot, but there are 11. Specifically because Keter is usually what the Zohar calls Almad the Itkasya, the hidden world. It's something we don't focus a lot. It is the crown. You don't touch the crown. You don't question the crown. You don't get to the crown. If you steal the crown jewels, you're in deep trouble. It's something that is out there, and we're going to start with the next one.
Can you just enlarge it a little bit?
What?
Can you just enlarge it a little bit, please? Thank you.
Enlarge it even more. Okay.
Yeah,
Is
thank
this better?
you. Oh,
Okay.
much better. Yeah.
Okay. We got Chachma, wisdom, we got Binah, understanding, and we got Dat, knowledge. These are the three top ones. If any of you have ever heard the term Chabad as a sect, it's an acronym of Chokhmah, Binah, and Dat. Basically, as an example, there's the light of the divine that gives you wisdom. It gives you understanding. At least in the Kabbalistic understanding, wisdom and understanding are not the same thing. Because you can be very, a way that some of us could relate to it, to think of this, is the difference between being book smart and being street smart. Chokhmah is you have a lot of knowledge, you have a lot of wisdom, you've read a lot of books. Binah is having a physical, it's wisdom. Binah is having an understanding, being able to talk to people, being social. If you only have one of those and there's no balance, you don't really have knowledge. Those two all come together, and the balance from them, we get Dat. Next step, we got Chesed. We got mercy. We got Gvura, strength, severity. You would think being merciful is always good, and on its face it is. But you also, it's a good example would be kids. If you give a kid everything they want, you need to have some gevura, you need to have some strength. But very importantly, you need to be able to balance them. When they're balanced, they're called teferet, they're called beauty. Mercy, strength, together to make up beauty.
And ruach is part of that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of, I'm not really reading everything yet. We're going through, we'll get to, yeah. Okay. There's a lot of, I don't know how much we'll get to, and today we're probably not going to get to a lot because we're running out of time, but I want to get through just the very basics of them. We got Netzach, which represents victory. Hot represents glory. You would think, and this is something that I really love, because in the modern world, we think a lot about victory as being glorious, or glory if you were victorious. The Kabbalists had the polar opposite understanding. In their minds, victory is the opposite of glory. And that's very important. And together, they create a strong foundation. If you balance victory, you balance glory, you create a foundation. And it all comes down to Malchut, or what's also called Asiyah, the physical world, the kingdom of this world. You don't have to understand everything there's to understand. For now, it's a blueprint. It is the names, it is the basic concept of the vessels. Those vessels, and the important message here being, you need to be able to balance them.
Oh, I see the body in the background now.
Yes.
I didn't see that before.
It's a union. Okay. We have 15 minutes left. I want to try to get to a few more. So I'm gonna try to push ahead. And does someone want to focus, because now we're gonna get to the Shvirah. So now we know the parts of, this is the corrected version, but there's still a lot left for us to do. So I want to read through this, and then I want to take some questions, because I can see on some of your faces that you are there but not there. Shvirah. So then I want to read this.
Sure, I can read it.
It's also, the first part is also like a recap of a lot of things we already had.
Okay. Chevrutah, shattering the vessels. At the beginning of time, God's presence filled the universe. When God decided to bring this world into being to make room for creation, he first drew in his breath, contracting himself. From that contraction, darkness was created. And when God said, "Let there be light," the light that came into being filled the darkness, and 10 holy vessels came forth, each filled with primordial light. In this way, God sent forth those 10 vessels like a fleet of ships, each carrying its cargo of light. Had they all arrived intact, the world would have been perfect. But the vessels were too fragile to contain such a powerful divine light. They broke open, split asunder, and all the holy sparks were scattered like sand, like seeds, like stars. Those sparks fell everywhere, but more fell on the Holy Land than anywhere else. Okay. That is why we were created, to gather the sparks no matter where they are hidden. God created the world so that the descendants of Jacob could raise up the holy sparks, That is why there have been so many exiles, to release the holy sparks from the servitude of captivity. In this way, the Jewish people will sift all the holy sparks from the four corners of the earth. And when enough...
We're good. I think we're good for now. I'm going to jump ahead. I don't love that text as much as the first few paragraphs were very good at explaining what our responsibility right now is. I'm not going to get to the next text, and you can read it a lot on your own. The next one is very understanding and very understandable, and you follow the link just for more, to go into more depth of what they are. But I think we have now, I feel like, and we'll have questions in a second if any of you don't feel like that, but I feel like we have a wrap on the very basic understanding of what Kabbalah is. There was a lot of problems. They were solved in certain ways. Some of the ways it was originally solved wasn't really good. It broke, hence why there's so much bad in the world, which again was simply the Kabbalists and Judaism as a whole trying to make sense of all the broken things. And our job right now is to find all of those sparks, all of which are part of those virtues that we mentioned before, pick them up, balance them in the correct way, and fix them. Tikkun olam, correcting the world. Very short version, every deed that you do, and that's how the Kabbalists saw the world. Every good deed that you do is trying to find those sparks. Now, for those of you who in my last class will also know there's a lot of Hasidic people, and we'll get to that in the next session, a lot of Hasidic teachings that focus on how ultimately everything that we just discussed is what we call God. So basically those vessels are God. We saw that in one of the texts also. The people doing the fixing, the people doing the tikkun are God. Each and every one of you are God. Every object in the universe is God. But more importantly, yeah, like Joni said, echad. Everything is ultimately one. We all together are basically different filtered versions of that light. To go back to the stained glass example, or if you put a shade that isn't a blackout shade on a window, and the shine of the sun comes through, that shine that you are getting right now, that spark of sun, is the same light that left the sun about 8 minutes ago. It is the exact same light. It hasn't really changed, but it's perceived differently. Everything in the universe is that in self, is that never-ending light. And they just went through different filters. Some of them filter through a vessel that got broken, and now they're broken. But it's still, just because it's broken, even if it's broken in the harshest way, and I don't know, it's a broken part that just wants to kill a lot of people. I don't know. Whatever idea, whatever brokenness it has at its core, and this is a very harsh thing, specifically in a world that loves to be polarized, and we want to be like, no, that thing is the ultimate evil. The Kabbalists, and like at its core, the Jewish belief was that no, everything is God. Everything is, or more importantly, what I would say, everything is what we call God, because God, I think, becomes this crazy word that people use and abuse a lot. But when we say, the Kabbalists at least, when they use the term God, they use the term divine, it is the sum total of everything. The good and what we perceive as the bad are simply broken sparks that flew away, that fell down, but they're still the same. And our mission, and more importantly, what we're going to do in the next two classes, is going to be to bring all of these home, to see how we can use all of that in our day-to-day lives, to think what it means looking at that from a modern perspective. And I imagine Yaakov saying no pressure whatsoever. You just fix the world, but no pressure. You can't be very Jewish and say no pressure. If you wonder why we're always so anxious, this is one reason. We're just like literally put up. You are here in the world, and everything you interact with, the worst possible things, are actually just broken vessels. And then how that all translates and how you get the whole Kabbalistic movement ultimately of making our day-to-day lives make sense in that context. I want to say one final thing, and then I will have time for a few questions. And I think that's very important because I've heard far too often, and I imagine that some of you who might be part of let's call it more progressive communities. I feel very comfortable. If you look up the new Shul definition, we are a progressive synagogue. That is in our mission statement. A lot of people like you, we are sometimes made fun by people who see a tikkun olam as a very religious and a very radical definition, as being like, oh, that's not really what it means. Showing up on the streets to protest for social justice or for human rights of every person isn't really what tikkun olam means. But I think we all understand that. No, that's exactly what it means. Finding all those broken parts and doing our best to fix that. Finding our own brokenness, finding where we fit to all of this, and that's how you get an entire never-ending wealth of Kabbalistic texts and customs and rituals, all of which ultimately come back. There's more texts, as you can see, some of which I will probably copy and we'll have it next week, in 2 weeks, and we'll have it in the next session as well. But also, please feel welcome, like take the PDF. This is going to be online. We'll make sure to send it out tomorrow as well to everyone who signed up. But spend some time, specifically if you were hopefully coming to the next few sessions, spend some time with it. I'll add one final thing. Registration is still open. So if anyone wants to join, it will still be possible. If you invite any friends, I will encourage you to send them the recording, and anyone who is going to register, there will be a recording of this. So anyone who registered plans to come to the next 2 sessions. And I know that wasn't necessarily true at my last Chevrutah class, where you could, like, everyone individually you were able to follow along. With these ones, it will be a bit harder. I'm not saying it's impossible. It will be a bit harder for those who didn't listen to this one to really understand what's happening after that. So I do want to encourage you, invite anyone you want, and invite friends and bring them in, and maybe even get them to join the new Shul. But more importantly, send them the link, send them the recording, and together we can. Okay, we have 5 minutes for some questions. Any questions? Sorry, let me rephrase that. Many questions, but anything specific you want to talk about? Go ahead. Is it Katie or Kat? How do you pronounce it? Katie? Okay.
Yeah, it's Katie. I just put this in the chat, but I was just wondering, like, what is the, like, ultra or more religious like thinking of what tikkun olam means? Like, why would they think that, like, yeah, what do they conceptualize that term as meaning?
The easiest way to look at it is they perceive that there are the commandments and the way they understand the commandments, and that is the way I was taught it was that there is only one recipe. Imagine this as being the different sparks to be like hidden, or like let's use archaeology as an example. If you don't use the correct tools to dig them up, you're not going to get to them. The very religious understanding of this is that it's still the same thing. We need to fix the world, but there's only one very specific way of doing it. And another, like, non-humanistic way or non-universal way of looking at it, which we saw a bit in that text that I skipped over a bit that you read earlier, where we'll be like, oh, this only applies to a very specific group of people. Only we can fix this, which I don't believe in, and I don't think that it's really in the Kabbalah. It really has to be part of it. But yeah, that is a lot what the more like the exclusionary definition of that would be. Okay. Oh, before I forget, also at the bottom of the source sheet, there's also contact information. If you want to be in touch in any way or form, feel free to do so. Okay. Victoria, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I feel like I need, like, if I took an edible, I would process it better, but so
Go for it.
But it feels like it's trying to go with the creation story, but trying to say why was it created instead of just describing the creation, which is what Torah tells us to an extent. But it feels almost like it's trying to explain, like asking, why is the world fucked up? Basically, at the risk of saying it that way.
No, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, it's trying to be like, the world should be great, but it isn't. And there's all those good things, but they're not always good. Why are they not always good? Why is there bad? I mean, and in many ways, also, to be honest, it is kind of an interpretation of the creation story, but it also is taking the creation story very literal to the extent where it's no longer literal. It's looking at the creation story and being like, oh, this literally, we were talking about light. We're talking about this literal definition of there was a void. This literal light was everywhere. We needed to separate it. but it also, and you can do that with the rest of the 6 days of creation and so on, where it all just simply becomes a metaphor of the world. And I would say for me, when I was growing up, I was really struggling with, like, I was taught that the world is very little, that the world is like less than 6,000 years old, and that I didn't make sense of it. And then you get to Kabbalah, and that was providing me personally with some answer, because I'm like, okay, it doesn't have to be literal. So yeah, I think the best way I can describe it, it's taking the creation story so literal that it's no longer literal. Well, thank you. That was very helpful. We have time for one more question, if there are any. Well, I know there are. If there's anyone feeling comfortable asking one more question. And if not, how about I wait a minute? If someone isn't comfortable enough asking, take a minute. Okay. Here's what we're gonna do. Oh, Katie, go ahead. Okay.
This is like a question I had when I read, like, my introduction to Kabbalah was that book that had all this language of like God emanating the vessels that are a part of God, but also not quite. And like the language of emanating. As I'm saying this out loud, I'm realizing I don't have like an actual specific question, but I think like something about the way that text that we read about like the emanation of the vessels and like how it's kind of not sort of different but the same as God. Like, could you just explain that a little more of like how we can understand that? It's just a little confusing.
Well, most people will use the term emanating as in like it's coming out of God, but I personally, and for those who have been in my last class know that I personally am a fan that no, it is exactly God. It's not very traditionally a religious belief, because ultimately it just means that God as an individual creation isn't really a thing. The way I personally see it is that God is, in Hebrew, there's a term called Shem HaMushal, a borrowed term. It means when you use a word or a name for something that isn't literal. In other words, my understanding, and in later Hasidic texts based on Kabbalah, you get it very direct, but my personal favorite understanding of God is that God isn't really a God in the conventional sense, but rather God is a word that we use to talk about the sum total of existence. And the Kabbalists talk a lot about how the primary name of God in Judaism, which is like the 4-letter, like Yud Hey Vav Hey, one of its meanings is literally being, existence. The sum total of all there is, we use the word God to talk about that. But everything that exists is God. It is why, like in my personal philosophy, saying something that I hate you because God told X, Y, and Z makes absolutely zero sense to me. Because the I is God and the you is God, so what are you talking about? This concept that everything, those broken vessels, those sparks of the divine that are in those broken vessels are still sparks of the divine. They're broken sparks, but they're still sparks. So, which is why I didn't use the term emanating. And I'm not going to be one to say there's only one way. Yeah, it is in part I and thou. So for me, it's less than I and thou. But yeah, we're going to get to that more in the next session. So we're running over time. But all I will say is that I lightly disagree with the concept of that a lot of other people talk about Kabbalah as coming from God, but not being God itself. I'll say one final thing. There's a Hasidic saying that says that God is everything and God is nothing. And that kind of boils down to that same idea, because it's nothing as in it's nothing separate, it's nothing that you can define besides of everything. And we're going to spend a lot more time with that. Before we finish, I'm going to ask you all for a favor and take a deep breath in with me. Okay, we're going to do a breath in, and we're going to hold it for 3 seconds, and then let it out, and we're going to do that 3 times, okay? your head hurts right now, I don't want to say good because I do feel a tiny bit bad, but also good. If your head is spinning, that's okay. If you feel like you have a basic understanding, but you still have more questions than answers, fine. As I said, I do encourage you. I am not one to give homework. So you can come back in 2 weeks not having looked at any of this ever over the next 2 weeks, and that's going to be fine. But I do encourage you, if you have more questions, watch the recording that's going to be sent out. Look on those texts. There's additional texts that we didn't read on the source sheets that I already shared. It's public. You can always access it. If you want, you can try to reach out to me. I'm traveling at the moment, but I will be home tomorrow. I will try. Oh, it's in 4 weeks. Sorry, Susan corrected me. The next session is in 4 weeks, but you will get an email. You will get. I will try. If you reach out to me, Susan, I was to give you a mission. Like you can get. I have an email. I have a Rabbi Abby Stein email. It's rabbiabbystein@gmail. By the way, it's very easy. I can't promise to answer in depth, but I will try my best. But I just want you to know that if you come off of this and you are like, what is going on? That's perfectly fine. Okay.
Rabbi Abby, thank you so much.
Thank you
I
all.
really, this was special. I'm not saying I understand everything, but just the way you presented it was just really wonderful. I can't find the words. It was
Thank
great.
you.
Very grateful for
Thank you.
this.
I will say, like, even from me, thank you, Joni. Like, I created the source sheet and my head is still spinning. So it's okay. And like, I'm seeing your faces and I know that some of you are just being like, there's a reason it's called mysticism. There's a reason it's Kabbalah. There's a reason for it. If it was always so simple, we wouldn't need a class for it. But I want you to know that is all. Everything you are feeling right now is valid, even if it is part of the Shivia, even if what you're feeling is a broken vessel. That's also valid.
Thank you so
Have
much.
a good night,
That's great.
everyone.
Good night.
Thank
you,
you.
everyone. Yep.
Bye, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.
Thank you.
Y'all, you're beautiful.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Susan, I'm just gonna say that now we need to get all these people, because I think about half of them are not new Shul members.
Oh, it was more this time, actually.
Really?
Like,
Okay,
in terms
good.
of this list, I mean, I have it and I wrote down where everybody's, who wrote in, where
Yeah.
they're from. I mean, there were how many? We had 25 at one point. There were 34 registered. There were 9 who didn't show. And out of the 34, it was 2/3 non-usual people.
Well, the good thing is we have virtual Shabbat every week, so there's a way to get them to join and do like every month. Sorry. And
Exactly.
Do,
Exactly.
Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we also need to talk at some point about that young professional Shabbat and how that's going to look and everything.
I would like to. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm in, as I said, I'm in Baltimore. I'm not around, but when I
Okay.
get back, I will contact
It's not for, it's not for a month, so we can.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's do that.
Good.
Sure. Okay.
Well, have a good night.
You too. Thank you so much. Enjoy Baltimore. Bye.